Welcome to B2B Marketers on a Mission, a podcast for B2B marketers that helps you to question the conventional, think differently, disrupt your industry, and take your marketing to new heights. Each week, we talk to B2B marketing experts who share inspirational stories, discuss their thoughts on trending topics, and provide useful marketing tips and recommendations. And now, here's your host and co-founder of Einblick Consulting, Christian Klepp. Okay, welcome everyone to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, where you get your weekly dose of B2B marketing insights. This is your host, Christian Klepp, and today I am joined by someone who is on a mission to define and lead clear go-to-market strategies and market communications plans on a global level. So coming to us from Zurich, Switzerland, Karin Samoylova. So I'm not exactly sure in which language to greet you, so I'm just going to say Grüezi miteinander, herzlich willkommen, selamat datang, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christian. I'm delighted to be here.
It was great to be connected, Karin, and I love how we started this conversation with talking about our children and about our multicultural background, and it's always nice to find somebody on the other side of the world and with whom you have these types of commonalities, right?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that's how we met, right? Like how we got connected through LinkedIn. I think someone posted a question about how many languages do you know? And yes, I answered there. And then I think that's where you contacted me and also said that you speak multiple languages. And it was, it was great. It's great. So we have that kind of similarity.
It's amazing, right? So thank you, LinkedIn. But yeah, let's get started. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, Karin, you posted something on LinkedIn, and I believe it was a while back, but that post got some great engagement. So I believe the topic was about the difference between a go-to-market strategy and a communication strategy. So can you elaborate on that post a little bit further?
Yeah, well, I think that post got really good engagement because it was a good balance between like these three different elements. It was approachable, it was educational, and there was kind of a sprinkle of, curiosity or openness, let's say, so approachable, meaning that image of myself, I put something personal there, and then I shared my own insights, right, on what are the key elements of a go-to-market strategy and what are the key elements of a communication strategy. Because I feel like, in many organizations, smaller ones might not even have any of the two, or it's happening more ad hoc. And then there are other examples where there's a mixture of both. And I just wanted to really clearly define there, look, these are the key elements here and the key elements there. But I left it also quite open too, because, you need to see what is the right product launch strategy for your organization, and you can adapt it to, I'm a big believer of being pragmatic and saying, okay, you can take the key elements of a go-to-market strategy and then build upon that, the communication strategy. But first, you need to have a go-to-market strategy. So I think that was the reason why the post got a lot of engagement. So, yeah.
Okay. No, that's very interesting. So basically, what you were also trying to explain was, which one comes first. It's not even a chicken or the egg question, right? It's you develop the go-to-market strategy first, and then followed by communications, right? Exactly.
You need to do that groundwork first. So in order to develop a impactful product launch strategy or have a successful product launch, you need to do first the go-to-market strategy, where you're going to define the why. You're going to define exactly, what is the main innovation the product is going to bring to the world. And then from there, you need to really do the research to create your value proposition. And then with all of that, you're going to make the magic happen, right? You're going to bring that into a story and push it out to the world. And I think that's such an important part of it. And I think many just don't realize how important it is to first do that groundwork, right? To research your MCC, I call it, the market, competitors, and the customer, right? Before you can really build strong value propositions that you're going to push out to the world. And so that the customer feels like, okay, yeah, this product speaks to me and this is worth my attention, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Wait, hang on a second. So are you trying to say that you can't just launch the product and the product will sell itself because that's just how good it is?
Oh, well, Christian, this deserves like a whole podcast on its own.
This is a
Like,
separate interview.
it's
Separate
it's like
episode.
there have been really lots of instances where the product team comes on and say, "Hey, we've got this great product. Please put it on the website." Yeah, okay. No, that's not how it works. No, this is not how we're gonna do it. And there needs to be more work to be done. And you need a framework, and that's gonna help you to manage that and control the process from A to Z when you launch your product.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of which, talking about common mistakes and misconceptions when it comes to go-to-market and communication strategies. Talk about some of the ones that you've seen out there, and what do you think marketers can do to address these? And you brought some of them up already.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with one. It's pretty like, there's in marketing, there's the 4 Ps, right? And it is really important to focus on those. But it's not only that. You're going to have to work more than just the 4 Ps. You're going to have to build in the processes, and you need to build that story. Today, more than ever, you need to have that story to be heard in that world full of noise, right? It's not, sure, you need the product. You need the price, know the price. You need to know the channels you're going to push the product out, the place, and promotion. But there's so much more to that. It's not let's build a product brochure and put it up on the website, or let's do a little press release and that's it. And no, there's much more to that. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that's happening in many organizations, that it's enough to have the products and know the details of around that, and okay, go ahead and put it on the website or so, and that's it. I think that's one of the misconceptions that is clear. I mean, there was an article in Inc., I think, that stated that 95% of new products fail. And part of the list of issues that contributed to these failure rates, 95%, yes. So, and they contributed to parts of the issues that contribute to this failure rate is that there were lack of processes, or not bringing in marketing from the start of product development. So that was also part of my job in my previous job in my previous company, where I had to build a go-to-market strategy template from scratch, and then also build it into the gate process, right? To make sure that in the beginning of the product lifecycle, or when the product is being developed on gate 0 and 1, you need to already go through the go-to-market strategy, already draft that go-to-market strategy, and get the insights from marketing, so that you can really challenge the value propositions. Like, are we really looking at the key features that we need to make this product successful on the market? Like, okay, sometimes, the product team and the project managers are like really focused on the resources, and they're thinking of, okay, this feature is possible. We can create that feature, but then maybe that other feature is really going to be the key differentiator and make that product unique and special, that the customer is going to really be like, wow, I need this product, right? So yeah, I think it's such a important thing to also consider that in the whole process. Like assuming that why your customer picked your product, right? So there's a lot of assumptions out there, like of course you're like busy getting the proof points. When you have a prospect, you're getting the proof points, you're setting up meetings, you're setting up demos, and you're just really busy making sure that the customer's happy. And then when the contract is finally signed off, and so when Mario's going to ask, like, okay, do you know why the customer chose us? And then they're just like, yeah, they've mentioned some things, but it's not really like 100% guaranteed. It's out of the discussion, it gets kind of clear that, that they don't really know 100%, right? So I think that's really important to understand, that it's maybe just worth getting on those customer calls as a marketer and asking directly, why did you choose us, right? What made the product, what feature from the product made you decide that this is it, And another misconception is when that creating messaging for the product is easy. There was like many instances where like, okay, yeah, we'll need 5 minutes to build the messaging for the product. and again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that you need to do the groundwork, you need to do the research, you need to understand the market, the competition, and also your customer base, and find out, okay, what is the product and customer fit, and what are the gains and what are the pains of the customer, and then how do you address those with the product, and then create that value proposition that you then use in your messaging and in your story, and then in your communication strategy.
Absolutely. So you mean the value proposition cannot be about your proprietary technology? You brought up some really great points, and I wanted to go back to. I had 2 follow-up questions, based on your points. So one is, and you kind of mentioned it in the past couple of minutes, but do you think a lot of the times why these mistakes happen is because there seems to be, and not necessarily pointing fingers at any specific group, but there seems to be a lack of the knowledge of the customer's actual need and how that product or that solution can fulfill that need. Also, probably the buyer's journey, because as we all know, in B2B, it tends to be a relatively non-linear, highly complex. I'm going to call it an ecosystem. I mean, if you look at these reports, like from Gartner or whatnot, I mean, it's a super complicated buying process, right? So that would be my first question.
Yeah, there's definitely multiple touch points. I mean, that's why it's so hard to even understand when did the customer decide, Sometimes it can be very obvious, like I can speak from my experience with Bird, where we did a co-marketing campaign. And then afterwards we had other customers calling us and like, oh, we want the exact same product that you announced. And the meeting just went smoothly. And so there it was really, really clear where the marketing campaign gave direct return on investment in millions. But but then usually you don't know really where was the deciding factor, where was the point where they decided, yes, that's it. There's so multiple touch points, and especially today where most people are spending time in front of the PC, in front of their phones, or not anymore, commuting or in meetings as much, or in trade shows or on the phone. It's really like, it's through these digital marketing content that where you see on the social media or in a webinar or a press release, or, so many different touch points where one customer might have read about your product and your organization or your business, and that as a whole has helped them make that decision, right? It's so nuanced, but that's why it gets really important, again, to make sure you have the research, make sure your messaging is really rock solid, and then integrating it into the different assets and pushing that out so that it's really consistent throughout the journey. Also internally, outwards, when sales speak, that they're all speaking the same language.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you brought up the part about market research, because that's a nice segue into the next question about the importance of conducting research. And I'm going to ask another question on top of that question, at least from your experience, Karin. Do you feel that sometimes in B2B, they kind of treat conducting research as optional?
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. And of course, I understand, it takes a lot of resource and time and effort. And then, in the real day-to-day, are so busy, and, products getting launched one after another, and there's a lot of people to get aligned and get the key stakeholders involved. And I understand, in that day-to-day that it gets difficult and you have to choose your priorities. But in order to have a successful product launch and to really resonate with your target audience, it's really going to help to do that research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And most important of all, it's so that you can develop these products and then take them to market without, and avoid the guesswork, I think is what I was trying to say.
Yes.
Because I've seen that personally happen where a product team and a marketing team launched a product to market based on their own experience, which in some cases might be a little bit outdated, right? Because if you're talking about like experience from like 10 years ago, well, then it's probably not really relevant right now, right?
No.
And especially in your current line of work, I mean, it's constantly evolving. It's technology, right? So it's
Oh yeah. And I mean, that's why, like, for the go-to-market strategy, it's like, it's a living document, right? You know, when something pops up in the market, you need to adjust. Yeah.
Absolutely. You talked about this a little bit earlier in the conversation, but, just going back to the parts and the different elements that are needed in a go-to-market strategy and a communication strategy. So maybe just top level, can you give us a bit of a breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, first with the go-to-market strategy, I mean, let's start with the definition. And when I was looking back 8-10 years ago, I was looking, okay, for a definition, and I found a pretty good one that I still like. It's saying that a go-to-market is a plan of an organization utilizing their inside and outside resources, for example, your sales team, your distributors or partners, to deliver their unique value proposition to customers and achieve competitive advantage. I really like that definition because it focuses on creating the value proposition and then using the inside and outside resources to, communicate that outwards and to make it in every stage of your product launch and each asset and each activity part of it, that value proposition. So it's really clear, and that, we're humans, we're going to hear it once, but you need to hear it several times to really get it, and here that's part of that go-to-market strategy. So that's a definition. So, and then the key elements, right? So from here, it's, from my experience, like I said before, it's good to start from the beginning, start in the beginning of when the product is being kicked off and accepted in the organization. That's usually happening in gate 0 or 1, or in other organizations more, ad hoc. You can feel, it has to be at least around 6 months in advance, around that time frame. And the key elements of the go-to-market strategy, I have like even an abbreviation for myself to just, always remember. So that's the WCM, right? So it's really sequential steps. You have to think of first why do you need a go-to-market strategy? Is it a new product that's going into existing markets, or is it a new product going into new markets, or is it an updated product that's going into new markets? If it's an updated product going to an existing market that the customer already knows, then more or less, you're not really going to need to have a full-blown go-to-market strategy going on, maybe a marketing plan. But yeah, so that's the why. Define the why do you need a go-to-market strategy? And then also, what is the big innovation that your product is providing, to your target audience? And then next with the C is create value proposition. Really, research your MCC, so your market, competitor, and your customer, and then understand the product customer fit, define the key messages, and then you go to the next step where it's the M, you make the magic, right, happen. So that's where you build that story, and then you decide on the different assets and activities where you're going to weave that story inside those assets and activities. And then you'll have to then, of course, review that and see what are the key KPIs that you're going to look at. And that's where there's the part where the communication strategy has to come over when you're going to make that magic happen. You're going to take that story and key messages, and define which assets you're going to use and which activities you're going to do, right? If it's like a big product launch, you need the whole package. And then if it's a more minor launch, then a more smaller package. And then defining in the advance also what performance indicators you're going to look at as a benchmark, and then and reviewing it, and then of course, involving the rest of the team and aligning and executing. So that's basically the difference between, the key elements of the go-to-market strategy and a communication strategy.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to ask you something only because you've brought it up a couple of times, right? Like it's you talked about like you've got to tell that story and convey that story and deliver that story. So I'm going to go back and ask you explain a little bit more what is in this story. I'm trying to use that technical analogy where you try to if you get a TV and then you open it up and break it down into its parts, right? What that story looks like.
Sure, let me break it down. I mean, it's quite straightforward, but I guess not as such for others. So it's good that you raised that. Because it's not that easy, especially in B2B marketing. And I think in technical companies, it's more like, okay, here's a list of features, let's create the benefits, and then create the assets, But for instance, for a press release and for, your presentations, if you're going to do webinars, it's so helpful to have that story. And that story is basically, looking at the trends, the market. And then that's the context. And then your product, how does your product kind of fit in the context? And then how does it fit to the customer, or how does it answer your customer needs? So it's that fusion of those three things, so market trends, your products, highlights, and the customer needs. And then that's the key. That's the key. Those are the key elements basically when building that story. And that's why it's, again, really good to have that research, right? So that's where it's going to help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love how you brought that up about how it should focus on the customer. It reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book, but there's a book out there by a guy called Donald Miller, and it's about building your story brand. And basically, he uses the same principles in storytelling, and this is applicable to marketing across the board. But I think what I'm trying to get at here is he was using the story format that you see if you read any type of mythology around the world, right? So it's basically where you make the customer the hero, right? So basically, the format is a hero has a problem, meets a guide who has a solution that prompts him to take action so that he or she succeeds and avoids failure. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it was so interesting how, when you just explained it a couple of minutes ago, how your explanation just kind of fit beautifully into that formula, so to speak. Right?
Yeah, it's usually like that, right? In a story, if you read a book, there's always going to be the problem and the main character who has this issue and then goes through this, and then it goes through these different phases of the story where you builds up, and there's a peak, and then it goes down. So I think I didn't see it in that, it's good that you kind of connected that to that. So I like that, but that's how it works.
Unless, of course, you're referring to Game of Thrones, where everything is super anticlimactic and and you feel that the outcome is predictable, but it's not. But that's a different story entirely. But Karin, we are getting to the point in the conversation where I ask my guests for actionable tips. Yeah, and let me just set this up here, all right? Because let's also appreciate that not everything that you do in your field of work can be done overnight, right? This isn't something that can, you have a 48-hour turnaround, but there are some things that B2B marketers can do right now to address some of these challenges that they're having. So that's the question.
Yeah.
Right? So what are some immediate steps that B2B marketers can take to improve the way they develop both a go-to-market strategy and a communication strategy? So talk about what they should focus on? What are some quick wins?
Right. Yeah. I think there'll be 3 points that I'm going to share today. I think first is make sure you have a template or a framework. This is for your peace of mind. It's really to reduce your stress levels and frustration levels. Have a framework. And if you don't have one, get one. There are experts out there, professionals out there that have a proven template for a go-to-market strategy or a communication strategy, and go get one or create one. Sit down. Like back then when I created one from scratch 10 years ago, I sat there with head of marketing and head of product strategy, and we're like, okay, what are the key things that we have to look at? And then it evolved. So you can try that, but it's going to take some time, or you just go out there and find one. And that's one of my recommendations, right? So you can start feeling like you have a control over the process of your product launch. And second one would be get more on customer calls. Get more on customer calls. And I know that it takes time to build credibility if you're in an organization, to build credibility and trust, so that, either sales organizes that call or you just sit in one of those calls, but don't give up and ask for it. So you can start today by asking to get more on customer calls, to just listen in first. And then eventually, maybe you can then ask your questions. That way you get firsthand input from the customer, instead of it being that conversation being filtered through by different people like the salesperson or so, even though, yeah, it's great to get that perspective from sales, but it's going to be a totally different story if you're going to have that direct conversation with the customer so that you can ask your marketing questions. Yeah. So definitely I would recommend that as a second thing. And then third, experience the product. And I think I once posted that on LinkedIn, and then someone like, oh, but it's not sometimes easy to do that. And da-da-da. And I understand not every form of product, but at least one form of the product or legacy product that your company produces. That way can really understand the customer's pains and gains and really understand, okay, how does it feel like? I mean, go join that programming course, even though you're going to be the idiot in the room perhaps because you don't have the technical background, but even just going through that process and trying it out, you understand kind of what is customer going through, was the customer going through, the different steps, and get a feel of it firsthand. And that's where you can then really build a story, right? You're going to understand the different, usually when you're going to write something about a product without knowing it, you're going to get 80% of it, but that rest of the 20% that really matters, really shows that you understand the customer, it's really going to help to experience the product. So I really would recommend as a third thing to try to experience a product, like one form of it, not every type of it and feature. I understand that gets then a bit overwhelming, but at least some of it, So that would be the 3 things that I would recommend that B2B marketers should do straight away. And if you do that, I can promise you, you're going to be ahead of the game.
Those are some pretty solid tips, I have to say. You made me think of at least 2 follow-up questions as you were giving your recommendations. I think the first one, and this is not necessarily to play devil's advocate, but I'm sure you can answer this. The proven template piece, right? So there are some people, even in my own experience as a marketer, that are opposed to always giving people templates to follow. And part of that reason might be because, things change so quickly. Although a part of me feels that this refusal to use templates is actually just creating more work for the marketers further down the road. But anyway, enough about me. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, as I said, I'm really pragmatic. Its template is not rigid, like all the templates that I bring to the company, or like, for instance, to ABB Robotics where I work, it's not, it's a team. First of all, you get team input and different stakeholders, and each organization is different, and there'll be different things that are important. But then also product launches are different too. So you're gonna not use each element perhaps. You're gonna skip maybe some of them. There's a blown out template, and then you're gonna see what works for this launch. But then there are those key elements that you will see yourself that those are important, that's a non-negotiable. So it's gonna give you a place where you can start, right? Instead of just stress overload, like, oh, I'm being ad hoc, and we're human, so that just gives you a framework. It's a guide, it's the go-to document where everyone's going to get aligned, and you can just use it as what works for that moment and that product.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. No, so that was my first question. And the second one is going, to the part about like experiencing the product. So it's interesting that you brought up that point because I had someone else on the show, it was about a week or so ago. And he was coming from a place where he said that it's important for marketers, and I'm sure you agree with this, to highlight the impact that their efforts are making to the business. And part of how they should be doing that is, and he encourages marketers to go and take a finance course for non-financial people, right? So basically marketers, and I'm one of those where I finance is not my favorite topic, but I did learn it for the same reason. You have to know how to read a P&L because you have to understand how the company makes money, right?
Yes.
So your thoughts on that? Because
totally.
I think there's two camps in the marketing world.
Oh yes, no, that's going to help you so much. I mean, I'm so thankful for my experience when I was working at Puma in retail. I was the assistant, retail coordinator to the head of EMEA retail, and we were looking through the P&Ls together, and I was helping him with doing that. And I'm so glad for that experience, because there was already the crash course on everything. I was asking my questions, and I was going to finance department too, and try to find the discrepancies and so forth. So no, that has helped me so much too to understand. And I agree with you. That's going to help really much to understand what matters for the business, what your CEO of your company cares about. Profit, margin, EBIT. So yeah, that's definitely good advice.
Absolutely. Okay, so as they say, the implementation of a campaign is, or the initiatives are just as important as the strategy. So, you've given us so many great tips so far, but what are some specific metrics that marketers should be looking at when it comes to go-to-market and communications? And maybe, again, just top level, because you can go nuts here and have so many types of metrics and attribution, right? So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I said, you got to look at some key performance indicators, but I take it also with a grain of salt. I believe in gathering and looking at data. It's good. And it's a really good, can I say, relative indicator, but it's not an absolute indicator. There's some non-negotiable assets that you're going to have to do for any product launch. And then you got to leave also some room for creativity too. But we do look at metrics such as, social media engagements, the webinar participants and attendees, and then like more qualitative, like what questions were asked. And then we go to another main marketing asset, for instance, product brochures, how many were downloaded, the traffic to the product webpage, and all of those usual metrics that give you a really good indicator, like, okay, how was that launch? You look at it from the day of launch till a month out. But then again, also, really like tied in with the metrics too. You got to look at, marketing has also long lasting impacts. And I think we're going to talk about it also later, that you have to see that sometimes you're going to have activities after product launch, and they're going to give a really good return on investment there. That's also really important, of course, obvious metric that you want to look at. How is it impacting the revenue? How many products were sold in that period of time, in that 1 year time frame? But in a month, it's a bit hard. So, there's like these different levels that I look at, 1 month after the launch, those key metrics, and then also a year later, where I go revisit again and check those metrics and also other impacts that really influence the business. And I think also worth mentioning is also qualitative metrics, such as those looking at the customer journey. It's really important, seeing, okay, what are the typical touch points that you will see for this product, and then analyzing that and saying, okay, where is it worth investing your resources in? Like where should you invest time and resource? And for instance, if you see that the customer is going to be for sure, I wonder how do you use the product, then for sure sometime in your campaign or product launch or afterwards, you're going to have to make a user guide video if you really want to do even better impact or better experience for your customer. So yeah, that's kind of like, I guess, the nutshell of the key metrics that topic.
Okay. No, I mean, yeah, and I tend to agree with that. Like it's interesting, the qualitative aspect. In many cases, how little airtime that gets because of the fact that it can't be measured. I mean, at least not the way that you look at a spreadsheet or a chart of data, right? It's a little bit harder to measure, like as you said, like when you conduct in-depth customer interviews, for example, right? How to measure that, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's also, depending on your business, right? You're going to look at how fast you converted that lead. And so, yes. Yeah, you can really go far on this topic, like you said.
Yeah. Yet another podcast episode. Yeah. Okay. Well, and here comes a question that you and I have been discussing, like at least for a day or two. A status quo that you passionately disagree with, and why?
I want to say, well, to this question, my response will be that I think the usual status quo is investing a lot of time and effort in organizing a product launch, up towards the day where it really peaks, the efforts peak, and then you push it out to the world, and then you hear crickets. It's just quiet, and you don't hear a peep. I think that is such a waste, and you need to continue the momentum. Whether it's, and then it's not just just posting again on social media. I think there you need to work with the product manager, work with the team, and see, okay, look, what is happening in the back end? What are the activities happening with the customer? What are the opportunities that we have to relaunch or make another communication or another marketing activity to again do another peak, and bring it back to life and continuing that momentum, right? So I think that's a huge status quo that I try to fight against. And again, it's a big battle because there's lots going on, more products to launch, and it continues. But it's always like when you have that time, go back, okay, what have we launched? Check in, ask those questions, and see if there's an opportunity again to make some noise again.
I tend to agree with that. What I'm going to say is that that's a pretty strong current you're swimming against there. And I think yes. I think a lot of it also has to do with, and I'm sure you've had the same experience. There's a lot of this inside out versus outside in. Right, going on, because they're launching this product and everybody internally is getting so excited and it's going to market, and what sometimes people internally don't realize is that maybe the market doesn't know, or maybe they don't care, right? And then as you said, then suddenly there's crickets and everybody's like, well, what's happening? How come there's no momentum, right?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that you shouldn't, to use that English expression, not lose steam, right? It has to keep going, right? It has to, because the launch itself is not necessarily going to be the one that makes those big waves that everybody's hoping for internally, right?
Exactly, Christian. Because and that's why you need to again repeat, do the repurpose the content, find opportunities like write a white paper or do another webinar after the product has been in the market and see get the responses from customers and build a story around that. So there's a lot that you can do, and that's why I think I'm a big believer of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, as long as you believe that, you've got plenty of work to do. Plenty of work.
That's the downside of it, right?
It can be the downside, but it can also be an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
It can be an opportunity
for
you.
Definitely.
To
stand out.
To stand out. Going back to what you said at the beginning. Yeah.
B2B marketer, if you want to gain the visibility or you want to, make a difference, then there are opportunities there.
Absolutely. Karin, this has been an amazing conversation, as expected. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with the listeners. So quick intro to yourself and how people out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you don't know, my name is Karin Samoylova, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I am a B2B marketer. I've been doing B2B marketing as a product communications manager for 8-10 years, in high-tech companies, startup, mid-size to large corporations. Today, I'm working for ABB Robotics. I am very passionate about, translating key features into value propositions and building a framework to help launch your product with a bang. So if you have any questions or you want to connect, just go out and reach out to me. Go ahead and reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Christian. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I had a blast. But so once again, thanks so much for coming on. Vielen Dank. Terima kasih.
Vielen Dank, Christian.
Yeah. So take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.